Welcome, my dear students and ladies and gentlemen. We will be looking at chapter number 3 for advanced performance management, which is a quite important and a fairly straightforward chapter as well. Budgeting and budgetary control. So there's a lot of things that we will be looking at, but let's start with introduction. Now, what we need to understand firstly is that where does budgeting fit in the company in the traditional sense of management accounting and business management. What does budgeting do? It helps us plan. It's part of the planning process because you're looking at the finance planning through a budget. If you're establishing a budget, you're just coming up with the numbers that you're willing to spend, right? What is your plan of expenditure? And also, ultimately, you're going to try and estimate into that plan your estimates of income. How much are you going to, what's your forecast revenue? What's your forecast other income, etc., etc. So that's part of that. But a budget also has another purpose. It One of the key purposes is that it helps us control matters, because when you have a plan or when you have a budget, it's the way you want the things to go. It's how you want things to happen. And can you guarantee that the way the things would happen are actually the things that are actually going to happen are actually the way you want them to happen? How many times can you tell in life that everything happened exactly the way I wanted? I would say that there may be many occasions in your personal experiences that things didn't go the way you planned. So same story here. You have your plan, which is called a budget, and then the actuals happen, but it might be deviated, or it might have deviated from the actual plan. So this is not easy. So, what does control do? It helps us continuously, as we implement our strategy, it helps us continuously keep track of how far we are from our budget. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? And to take real time or live corrective action to try and stick to our plan. So that's the ultimate goal of budgeting, and what budgeting has actually helped us achieve over the course of the history of business, at least modern traditional business. So, before we move into the next segment, what the APM syllabus does is it does give us a few critical and simple points of how budgeting can help an organization, or what are the uh, ideal, or what are the component purposes of budgeting. And those are, as I said, they start with planning and control. But before that, just to touch on the definition that the book gives you, a budget is a quantitative plan. So it's numbers, right? It's not qualitative. It's a quantitative plan prepared for a specific time period. So you have a particular time period attached to it, and it is normally expressed in financial terms and prepared for 1 year. Doesn't mean that you have to have budgets always for 1 year. You can have it for a week if you want it. But generally, for organizations, for contemporary organizations, financial organizations, for profit organizations, budgets are developed on a 1 year basis fundamentally. And then you would have other versions, shorter versions, breakdowns, flexed budgets, etc. Okay, so coming back to purposes, planning and control, I already explained, and that is the overarching strategic function of budgets. But in addition to this, budgets helps us communicate the plan, right? When you communicate your budget, you're essentially telling your entire organization, this is what we are trying to achieve. It helps coordinate because there are different components of budget, and all parts of the business are involved in the budgetary process. And therefore, this department knows what that department is doing. They are interconnected. It kind of creates a link between different departments, different SBUs. Evaluation, it's part of the control process, but it helps assign accountability for different aspects, for different people, for different staff members. It tells us exactly who is responsible for what part of the budget. And it also can be used as a form of performance evaluation for each team or each department, because you have the budget assigned for them, and then you can track their performance and see whether they are doing well or not. So it's part of performance evaluation also. It can be a form of motivation, given that the budget is set at the right tone, with the right kind of motivations, with the right kind of incentives and rewards. Then people might actually get the idea that if they achieve the budget, they're in for a good time. That they would make more money, they would make bonuses, they would get promotions, etc. The budget is actually used as a tool for motivation as well. It's one of the important aspects of budgeting is authorization, because you can't really get people to have a free all open approach to dealing with authorizing matters. So what does a budget do? It draws the boundaries, it brings in the necessary lines and the discipline around who exactly can do what. It's part of accountability. But for example, you would say a senior manager cannot approve expenses beyond $5,000. Those have to go to the director. So that sort of thing it can be included in your budgetary expenses, and therefore you have the allowances made for each of the authorization levels, and that allows you to calculate the total cost allowance that you have, even if it's a contingent allowance. So what does a budget do? It helps you maintain those necessary boundaries and authorities, because especially if you are allocating budgets for SBUs, mega budgets, then you will say that, okay, you have 1 million and you've authorized 1 million. It means that finance will only issue up to 1 million because that is what has been approved in the budget. And if a particular SBU needs more than $1 million, and what they will have to do is they will have to come back to the drawing board, get the approval from the directors, because the budget allowance is not there and budget authorization has not been provided. So it's a good tool to bring in some kind of control, discipline, and authoritative controls into your system. And of course, delegation. We've already touched about this, but the budget process, the overall process, it helps us really, assign accountability and separate responsibilities to relevant parties. That's a big deal. That really helps a company be very clear on how they want to function. It tells the people exactly how, who, or what they are responsible for. The second aspect to budgeting, kind of, how budgeting works, how the budgetary process works, is in the way people participate. The staff participates within the budgetary process. Now, what happens is there are two forms of budgetary participation. One is top down, the other is bottom up. So, top down is called authoritative or imposed budgeting, or non participative, and bottom up is called participative. So, a top down is essentially when the top level, the directors, the board of directors, the senior management really decides the budget. They don't really take into account anybody else's opinions. Doesn't matter. They definitely don't consult the lower levels, the operational tier, the tactical tier. They just set the budget. It's like the board of directors themselves deciding the budget. There are good things about it. There are bad things about it. But that's one form of budgeting. Because if you try to take too many opinions, then things can get tough. Obviously, the people who are going to chase the budgetary targets are not going to be very tough on themselves, even if they have the potential, right? So one could say that the directors are the ones who truly understand the potential and they are just trying to reap that benefit. But there are arguments against it as well. The second form of budgeting is bottom up or participative, which in general terms it's quite likable, because you're basically saying that the budget will ultimately, yes, it's at the hand of directors, but you're actually consulting. You're going to consult the budget holders, ultimate budget holders, who will be chasing the targets, who will be running, and who will be grinding, and who will be doing the work. You're actually going to talk to them, and you're going to get their opinion, and you're going to see what they have to say, what kind of targets would they be likely to achieve, what kind of ideal position they are thinking. So you get their consultation, you get their input, you get them to participate in the process, and then finally you take all of that information and you finalize your budget. Of course, in that finalization, you might, if you're a director, you might end up using your numbers anyway without taking into account. But that process of communication, that process of participation, it kind of brings the sense of inclusivity of the people who are actually going to hold the budgets at the end, who are going to be responsible for achieving those budgets. And that can be a motivating factor. That is also one way how motivation can be achieved. So you have some reading there. We will be looking at the methods of budgeting individually in the next few segments. Thank you so much. That is introduction to budgets. I will see you soon. Good luck.